So I want to start with the special session, obviously. That happened this week. They were called back in on Monday, adjourned on Tuesday without a solution.
Right.
Let's just start with what you thought about it being called, the fact that the bill's been overturned. Do you think they should go ahead and deal with it, or?
They have to deal with it. There's no question. They have to deal with it. And they better deal with it in the upcoming session. I think they will, from what I read. I think there's an appetite for that, but you have to ask the legislators.
So you absolutely do think that something has to be done. Some reforms have to be made.
Yes, no question.
So in the bill that the governor introduced in the special session, House Bill 1, it mainly stripped most changes to KRS. It mainly focused on the teacher system because the other changes were sick leave, things like that for KRS. Those were pretty much stripped. So how did you feel about that bill?
It left in the one key thing we need, and that's what's being used, termed level dollar funding.
Right.
We would call it fixed dollar funding. That's a huge key to the solution to the problem.
So you think that's the main reform they have to pass?
Absolutely.
What about benefit changes?
It took out Tier 4, but that has, in the short run, that has very little effect on us. In fact, what's called normal cost for Tier 3 is less than Tier 4. Tier 4 is a long-term solution, but we have an immediate need for funding.
Absolutely. But as they continue to try and deal with this, they continue to run into issues. And in 2013, they did reform KRS. This one mainly focuses on the Kentucky teachers' retirement system.
Correct. Right.
What do you think about the 2013 reforms, how they're doing, and do you need reforms beyond that point?
Well, beyond what I just talked about, funding.
Yeah.
Well, the 2013 established Tier 3. We have, as of the moment, we have one retiree in Tier 3. I mean, because it's hadn't had time to work out for the 5 years. It'll have a benefit over time, but it's going to take a long time for that benefit to play out.
But do you think it's going to work? Do you think it's going to help solve the issue?
It'll be a good contributor, absolutely.
Because that's what they want to do with KTRS too, the teachers' retirement system. There's a lot of upheaval about that, a lot of problems and concerns, but you do feel that kind of system will help solve the problem long term?
Yes. Yeah. Now we have, so it's been in place for 5 plus years. We have not all active, but we have about 55,000 people who are in Tier 3. But it takes a long time to play out because people who are coming in as young people, they may not retire for 30 or 35 years, and that's where the benefit takes place.
So what would you say to people in the Kentucky retirement system and the Kentucky teacher retirement system that are really kind of worked up over these reform bills and are concerned about their own benefits? What would you say to them about these types of reforms and what they mean for people who are already in the system?
All I can speak to is the KRS. I can't speak to the teachers, but over and over, the legislators say we're not taking away. The governor says the same thing. If you've got a benefit that's been promised, you're going to get it, and I think there's every intent to do that.
Well, it's legally kind of required as well. I mean, especially with people who already have the pensions. There are some small changes you can make, but really, with the inviolable contract, a lot of things can't be done, which I don't think a lot of people understand. Yeah,
and that could be tested in the court. Ultimately, the inviolable contract will be determined by the courts at some point if it comes to that. But I have every faith that the legislators and the governor have the intention and make the statement that people are going to get their benefits. It's just how we get the money to do that.
So during the special session, I saw you there earlier in the week during the committee meeting. Obviously, there's a lot of still talk about it. In that committee meeting, they said they wanted to go back to Senate Bill 151, the bill they passed and that the Supreme Court overturned.
Right.
What did you think about that bill when it passed?
The first time?
Yes.
Well, it did, I keep coming back to funding. It did the funding that we need. The other things were, it set up a challenge. And the COLA and the teachers set up a challenge. I don't know what more I can say. It's clearly that's the intent of the governor coming back with his bill that takes those things that were going to be challenged out in order to make it more plausible, more acceptable to the members and to the legislators.
Right. So let's talk about funding. Obviously, we know that over the last couple years, more funding has been contributed to both systems.
Right.
Much more than has been in the past because everybody realizes there is a huge problem and funding is definitely a part of that.
Right.
So let's talk about funding. The unfunded liability of your system in particular is quite large.
Right.
How much do you guys have on hand right now? Like what's your cash on hand? Because I know in previous testimonies you guys have talked about the fact that you only have enough for 2 years.
Yeah, well that's the K-9 has. There's roughly $2 billion in assets. We pay roughly $1 billion a year in benefits. That's the 2-year calculation. At the same time, we're going to get about $1 billion to $1.3 billion in revenue this year against $1 billion in benefit payments. So we're in a situation we're going to be cash flow positive. So if the level of assets is $2 billion, it ought to be, even barring the recent markets, it ought to be rising this year. We can take a roughly a 13% hit on the asset value in fiscal 19, and will still, the level of the assets will still go up. That's how well protected we are. Our investment group would say if the market's down 20%, we're probably only going to be down 10% because we've gone through an extensive look at the way we allocate assets and the assets we use, and looking for counterbalancing assets. So again, you know, we're concerned about the equity market, but if it drops 20%, our forecast would be we'd be down 10. And if we're down 10 and we're the equivalent of about 13% in inflow, we're still going to go up. The asset value will go up.
So you're not concerned
That's K9-HAS. The other plans are in better shape. Interestingly, when I first started here, and we talk about the 5 pension plans, K, non-HAS, K-HAS, city and county non-HAS and HAS, and the state police, they would talk about the K-HAS and the 2C plans, and they would call them the healthy plans. And I said, wait a minute, they're only 52% funded. They're not healthy. They're sick. State police is very sick. It's 27% funded. K9-HAS right now is 12.9. I mean, that is serious illness. So, you know, the fact that we thought that these plans that were in the 50% range were healthy, absolutely not. I mean, they're not healthy until maybe they get to 80%, but really until they get to 100%. And that's the goal over the next 25 years, is to get them back to where they were in 2002, 2003, where we're 100% funded. So what happened between 2003 and 2018? A number of things. First of all, it really starts with, you know, we want to blame the governor or the legislature. It starts with KRS. We allowed economic assumptions to be in place and used by the actuaries, and the actuaries really didn't fight it, didn't have recommendations to the contrary. We allowed assumptions that were unrealistic. There are 3 key economic assumptions: the inflation rate, payroll growth, and the interest rate. And so for years we had been assuming, first of all, inflation is kind of the driver of the investments. We had been assuming inflation would be 3.25%. The Federal Reserve targets 2. The actual experience over the last 10 years is 2. And so we, in the summer of 2017, the board revised that assumption down to 2.3% with the help of outside actuaries and experts. The investment returns were 7.5 in the C plans, and the K has 6.75, and the K non-has in the state police. If you looked at the returns over the last 10 years, K non-has in the state police was under 6%. K has, or the C plans, and the K hazardous were slightly over 6. And the forecast from the people that we now have on the investment committee, by the way, who were appointed in 2016, for the first time we had some really serious institutional investment background on it. So you're not just looking backward at doing assumptions, you're looking forward. In the forward look from these people was, and from investment management firms that from whom we solicited information, said this is not going to be a 7.5% going forward, or an 8%. And most of the state funds are, I don't know of anyone that's going up in their assumptions. They're all coming down. We're leading the pack. There's nobody that has 5.25 in the country that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of anybody that has less than 6, but there's nobody that's 12.9% funded. I mean, we have to be there. We have to have a portfolio that supports the liquidity and the risk constraints and so forth. Which leads to one point, but I want to come back to the assumption. But the point I want to make is investments aren't going to get us out of this problem. When you have $2 billion in the assets in the K non-has, and you have $15 billion in liability, 13.6 of unfunded liability, the investments don't make that much difference. Not to say we aren't working to protect those assets, probably more on that side and provide the liquidity than in having some great growth numbers, because great growth numbers aren't going to flow through. But back to the assumptions. So I talked about inflation, I talked about the interest rate, and finally payroll growth. And this is the real why we need a different way of funding that I'll come back to. Payroll growth, the payroll is the source of our revenue from the employers. We charge them bill them a percent of their payroll. So if their payroll is $100 million and the contribution rate is 49%, we bill them $49 million. And if you're a C employer, you pay it. If you're a K employer, the state, you can not pay it. You can fall short. So from 2003, and for the subsequent 12 years, not 1 year did we get reimbursed or paid or get the contribution that was required. But I'll back up and say that what we asked for was not enough. So when we look at the payroll and project what we're going to be getting, which is going to form the contribution rate, and we as a board say, payroll is going to grow at 4% a year. And I'll give you an example. We'll translate it to a bank, going to the bank for a loan. You go to the bank, you're making $50,000. You go to the bank, you want to buy a house, you want to get a mortgage. You've got the house and you know the size of the mortgage, and the bank says $1,250 a month. And you say, I'm making $50,000, I can take 20% of that for a mortgage payment. That's all I can afford. And that's $833. But my salary is going to grow at 4% a year. So why don't we just say, I'll give you 20% of my salary. And if I grow that salary at 4% for 10 years, it's $74,000. That's $1,250 a month. So now I'm at the level, and now I'm going to keep growing, and I'm going to be getting more, and I'll make up for the deficiency to begin with. Well, what happened, if you want to use the pension as an example, my $50,000 salary went down to $42,000 because it was declining by 2% a year. So I can afford a $667 mortgage payment when I'm supposed to be paying $1,250. What further, in the pension sense, what further causes a conundrum for us is employers, if they cut their payroll, they pay us less. They're presenting a percent of payroll. So how do I cut my payroll? I outsource. I don't replace retirees. I don't replace terminated employees. And so I'm shrinking my payroll. So I shrink my payroll and I'm giving you less, then we have to raise the rate. Ergo, 49% went to 83% for the K non-HAS this year. Instead of taking little bites out of this problem over time, we finally had to take a big bite because we had been so lax in the assumptions for so long a period of time. So we go to 83%, more incentive for the employers, universities, health departments, you name it, to downsize their staff. 83% goes higher, more people outsource. It's just a vicious cycle, if you will.
Right.
If you go to a fixed hour payment, it's like going back to the mortgage. $1,250 is it. You're going to pay $1,250. And if you can't afford it, then you've got to cut, in a mortgage sense, I've got to get a second job. Or I can't spend as much money on other things. And that's exactly the position the state's been put in. And that is, if you're going to have to pay more, we're going to have to cut services.
Absolutely, and that's the main issue right now. People are talking about tax increases and things to pay for this because we are, and like you said, there are multiple different contributing factors. It is underfunding, it is some things that KRS did over multiple years, a decade really. So, but I want to talk about one of the things you kind of touched on, which is the employee payroll growth, but let's talk about employees in general. There's been a lot of talk about if there are reforms and there's going to be kind of a mass exodus of people who are ready to get out of the system who are worried. But at the same time, we're in a situation where baby boomers in all sectors, not just the public sector, are retiring now. And there are a lot less state employees paying into the system. So that's causing you guys a huge issue as well, right? Right.
We have a graph that shows the number of employees coming down like this, the number of retirees going up like this. Those lines crossed in 2015. There is now one retiree for every 0.83 active members contributing. We're less than 1 to 1. Those lines have crossed and are continuing to go down. We're at 34,000 actives and 42,000 retirees. The trend looks like it's going to continue. I comment that Social Security is 3 to 1. We're 0.82 to 1. At 3 to 1, Social Security there's lots of concerns, and there needs to be. When Social Security started, it was 35 to 1. Now it's 3 to 1. But again, we're 0.82 to And I point to the K non-HAS, it's the most serious problem. It's the one where we can attempt to control funding as well. Again, the C plans they're not healthy, but we're less concerned about them. I mean, they're not a stepchild.
It's not dire.
No, it's not dire, exactly.
So, but isn't that kind of a problem, like you brought up Social Security, isn't that kind of a problem we're experiencing with these type of plans to begin with? They're now kind of an inverted triangle, if you will. It used to be, like you said, people used to have a lot more children. Those children would go to work, they would end up paying for the person, for their parent who would retire. We're not in that situation anymore, so isn't that a reason to kind of change how we do things moving forward anyway?
Yes, exactly. It's a defined benefit plan, although most corporations have gotten away from them, going to a defined contribution movement. But a defined benefit plan works better if you have a growing workforce. If you're a company that's growing, well, the state isn't growing as a workforce, and we're not in a growth industry, if you will. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think most people, like you said, private businesses are moving toward that. I think most people are starting to see workforce as a huge issue, especially as technology advances. The workforce isn't going to grow like it used to.
So I talked about funding, and I've talked about the assumptions were too liberal. So what we asked of the legislature was not enough by wide margin. What they gave us was not even close to the ask, 12 years in a row. It averaged about between 40 and 45% of what we needed. So we not only lost that 50 or 55, 60% of that money, we lost the earnings on that money. If they had been putting that money in over those 12 years, that money would be earning money, getting us a return. And somebody's done a calculation for us and said, in fact, we lost about $3 billion on investment return on the money they didn't put in. Not only so put the two together, it's pretty significant.
So I know that, and obviously the underfunding is a huge part of the issue, but I think I've heard in a couple committee meetings, the Public Pension Oversight Board, because like you said, there are a lot of things that KRS contributed as well. If they had funded your systems fully for everything you asked for over those years, do you know what it would be at in terms of a funding percentage?
The C plans gave us everything we asked for, and their C non-HAS right now is 52%. So what's the difference? Part of the difference is we didn't ask enough. Part of the difference is they put in benefit enhancements that weren't pre-funded. Part of the difference is we sold retirement credit at discount rates. There are a variety of things that contributed to that, but the single issue of the legislature didn't give what we asked ties to the 62%, and again, we didn't ask for enough.
So how do we fix this moving forward, other than the fact that, like we talked about, 2013 changes, we want to move to level dollar funding. Hopefully they do that in 2019 or soon, hopefully, before the next budget at least. And there is more funding going toward the system. So what else does KRS need to become healthy?
Patience. It's a 25-year solution.
Right.
Exactly. I go to meetings and I ask people, how many people have had a 30-year mortgage? A lot of hands go up. And I say, well, we effectively have a 25-year mortgage. It was a 30. It's a closed period. It's going down each time. We're down to 25. We can't. There's some talk about moving it back to 30. That wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be crushing. But we need to have the discipline to fund the ARC. The ARC is now, in my view, properly constructed. The assumptions are good, but they could change. We could have a board 2 years or 4 years from now and say, oh, gee, those are putting too much of a penalty on the employers. Let's move that interest rate back up. Let's move that payroll growth back up a bit. That could happen. That would be very detrimental. I had a call from the executive director of the Maine retirement system maybe a year ago, and she said, I've got some ideas for you about how you can fix your problem, because we were in a similar problem. Nobody was quite this bad. It was back in the 80s. And she said, have you thought about this? And I said, yeah, we're working on that. Have you thought about this? Yes, we're working on that. She said, I'll tell you what the key was. We got a constitutional amendment that said you have to pay the ARC. And therefore, you protect yourself against the legislature. Now, it's currently in statute they have to pay the ARC, but that could change in the future. The constitutional amendment, however, and unless it's constructed in a particular way, doesn't necessarily protect from the board doing something with the assumptions. So we need oversight, We need people who are knowledgeable about how this whole process works, and they're getting there. Pension Oversight Board, I think they would admit when they started in 2014, there may be one person on it that really understood pension funding. Now they would say a good deal of them know. Senator Bowen, Representative Miller, McDaniel, Representative Graham. I mean, they're really beginning to understand if we push this button, what happens, as opposed to pushing this button.
Right.
So the public needs to be educated too, which is a hard one.
It is. It's very difficult because it's an issue that doesn't affect the majority of people in the state, but it impacts all of us because the funding issue is a huge deal where either, like we talked about, taxes are going to go up, we're going to have to borrow money, something has to be done.
Yeah, I think that this may not be a popular thing, but I think the general public has to put trust in their legislators, and that they understand the problem and they know how to deal with it. The general public does not, and that's why you're getting a lot of outcry against legislators from people who don't understand the problem or the solution.
So last thing on this before we move on, are you guys concerned about a market downturn? There's a lot of talk about 2019 possibly being kind of a bad year in terms of the market. 2008 obviously had a lot of impact on KRS as well. That was another huge hit. So what if it happens again? What position is KRS in that situation?
So in 2008 or 2009, we had about $6 billion, and I keep focusing on K9 HAZ because it's
the most painful one.
Yeah, and it's the most best example of how to deal with it.
Right.
In 2008 or 9, we had about between $6 and $7 billion. If you lose 20% on that, you're losing 1.2 to 1.4 billion. If we lose 20% today, we lose 400 million. It kind of, if you say the assets aren't going to get us, and the K plan aren't going to get us out of here, that's not the solution. It's likely not to be the problem either. I mean, they're so small. That's the first point. The second point is, over the last 2 years, the new investment committee, with the help of outside consultants, but the committee itself, with this really a lot of talent on that committee, working with our staff, have reallocated the assets, come up with a whole new asset allocation process. And I'll go back to my statement about the market goes down 20, we would expect to go down 10. So we're really, our focus in that plan, and the C plans too, is protection and liquidity, not growth. So I wouldn't like to see a big market decline, but we're not going to jump over a cliff if it happens.